now what we have discussed, we have created an image from the container. Okay, but in real time scenario this approach is not recommended. In real time scenario we need to create an image using Docker file. Okay, we are not going to create an image using commit, because if you see in this approach what we are doing, firstly we have an image, and then from this image we are creating a container, and eventually by using this container we are creating this image. So we are doing a double work. So using this Docker file concept we are good to create the image directly without creating the container. In our Docker file, the first thing which we need to mention is from. What is the meaning of from? I would say it defines the base image. Okay, as we have mentioned, to create a container the first thing what we need a image. Okay, using this image what we were doing, we were creating a container and then we are converting this container into an image. The one of the most important thing is what? A base image. Using this base image we are good to create a new image. Okay, that is a compulsory one. Then we are good to mention label. It is optional one, not a mandatory. Label means what? A tagging, or I would say metadata. It has been created by whom, who is the owner, for which team, and all those information we are good to pass in label. The third one which we need to pass is run. So what is the purpose of run? I would say layers you want to add to base. If I want to install some set of software inside my base image, so in my Docker file what I need to mention? I need to mention run. So the next thing which we need to mention is cmd, or I would say entry point. Okay, so cmd is a default command that can run when container is created, while in the case of entry point it is similar to cmd only, but cmd can be overridden using docker run command, whereas if you are going to mention anything in entry point and once the container it is going to be created, it is 100% sure whatever you have mentioned in entry point it is going to be run, while in the case of cmd it is a default one. If you are not going to mention anything while creating of our container, so the cmd is going to be run. Right now if you are not able to understand, just ignore it. We are going to do a quick demo to understand this one. So the next thing is add and copy. The add and the copy is basically responsible to copy the thing from the source to destination. I would say if I'm creating an image and in this image if I need to copy some file from my local machine, then what we need to use? We need to use add. Again, if you're not able to understand, ignore this one. We are going to have a detailed discussion for this one too. And then finally we have the environment and expose. What is the purpose of environment? The environment is basically responsible to set up the environment variable inside our container, and the expose is basically responsible to expose some specific part to our container image. Okay, I'll create a directory name called as, this one typo, I'll create a directory name called as images, cd images. Let me clear my screen. Let me create a Docker file. Okay, press enter. If you see here, I have mentioned from ubuntu is my base image, means this ubuntu we are going to use to create a new image. Okay, and here I have mentioned the metadata, who is the maintainer of this image. Then I have mentioned run. How many times I have mentioned run? I have mentioned run 2 times. And what is the purpose of run? Layers you want to add to base image. So how many layers are going to be added? It is going to add 2 layers in my base image. The first one, it is going to update my operating system, and the second one, it is going to install the Apache, and then finally what we have, the CMD. What is the purpose of CMD? As we have mentioned, the default command that is going to run when container is created. I would say I have created a image name called as image-abc from this one. And if I'm going to create a container name called as c-abc from this image, so in the terminal, what we are going to see, we are going to see what? Hello world. Okay. So once I'm going to create the container, it will be more clear to you. But for now, you should be able to understand this Docker file. Let me come outside of this Docker file. So initially we created an image using commit command. Here we are good to create a image using Docker build command. The command is docker build -t. That would be the name of my image. And where my Docker file is present, it is present in my current folder. So I'm good to mention using dot. And see, my Docker image creation process has been started. Let me run a command called docker images. And if you see here, we have a new image name called as run demo-image. Okay, and the size is 261 MB. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create a container from this image, and let me press enter. And you see here what we have, hello world. As I have mentioned, the from is basically responsible for the base image which you are going to use. Then I have mentioned what labels. Labels is nothing, it is the metadata or tag. Then finally what I have mentioned, I have mentioned run. What is the purpose of run? The purpose of run is to add a layer inside our base images. And then finally I have mentioned what? CMD. In the CMD I mentioned hello world. And when I have created this container from this image, what the CMD has done? CMD is a default command that can run when container is created. So once my container is created, so automatically we are able to see hello world in my terminal. As we have discussed, what is the other option we have? We have the entry point. Let me do a quick demo to understand the entry point. I'll create a file name called as entry point. It is not mandatory to create a file name called as Dockerfile. If you're creating a Docker file with a different name, so while running the Docker run command, we are good to pass one argument called -f and the name of my Docker file. Then automatically the Docker daemon will be able to understand, okay, the Docker file name is not the Docker file, you have mentioned something else and you're passing using -f tag. I'll show you while running the Docker build command. So if you see here what I have done, I mentioned the base image as ubuntu, then I mentioned the label, and here I have mentioned the 2 times run. And finally, what I have done, instead of using CMD, I have mentioned what? I have mentioned entry point. So what is the purpose of entry point? You will be able to understand once I'm going to create a container from this image. Let me quickly create a container. We'll save this file, and I'm going to create a image, and the name of my image is entry point -image. But if you have noticed here, what I have mentioned here, -f. Why? Because the name of my Docker file is entry point. So after the build, I have to pass -f, then my file name, and this is the tag of my image. And finally, we need to mention dot where my Docker file is present. So in this case, we have the Docker file present in the same folder. Let me run this one. Okay. So till now, if you see the what I have done, I have created an image from the Docker file. Okay, from the Docker file. In the case 1, what I have mentioned, I have mentioned CMD. And the case 2, what I have mentioned in my Docker file using entry point. So in CMD, what I have done, I have created a container. At the creation time of my container, I am able to see whatever the thing we have mentioned in our CMD. And the same thing I have mentioned here. In the entry point also, I'm going to create a container, and let's check what we are able to see in the terminal. Okay, there is one typo, image. Okay, so here also we are able to check what? Hello world. In the CMD part also we have seen the hello world. In the entry point also we have seen the hello world. Let me create a new container for for this CMD one, and let me create a new container for my entry point one, and then we'll see the difference. Okay, while creating the container, I'm going to pass some argument. Let me firstly create a container for my Dockerfile image. Let me create a container from my run demo image. Okay, what I have mentioned here, I have mentioned here host name. At the runtime, I have passed one argument, and as you can see here, what we have the end result. The end result is my host name. Why? Because while creating the container, I have passed the host name argument. But let me do the same thing for my entry point image. If you see here in my entry point container, we are able to see hello world, and whatever the argument we have passed, it has taken it as a string. So if you see here, the CMD and entry point behave in a same way. What is the purpose of this CMD and entry point? Default command that can run when container is the default command when container is going to be created. That's why when we created our container from entry point image, we have seen hello world, and when we have created our container from run point image, we have seen the hello world. But while running the container, if we are going to pass any argument, in the case of CMD, it is going to be overridden, which means here I have mentioned what? A host name. Then what it has given? It has not given the hello world. It has given me what? My host name. Okay. While in the case of entry point, at the creation time of container also, if you're going to pass any argument, it will not be overwritten. Here, what I mentioned the host name, but still it has presented what? Hello world plus host name. It has taken the host name as a string. So the difference between the entry point and CMD is CMD value can be overridden at the creation time of my container, but the entry point cannot be overridden at any cost it is going to be run. So that is the difference between the entry point and the CMD. So the next one which we are going to discuss is CMD with entry point. So let me paste this configuration. If you see here what I have done, I have mentioned from the base image, then here is the tag, and what I have mentioned, I have mentioned two times run, so it is going to create a two layer for me. And here I mentioned the entry point and the CMD. The entry point is what? Hello, and my CMD, what I mentioned, world. At any cost, at the creation of my container, if I'm going to pass any argument, the world will be override. While in the case of entry point, I'm 100% sure whenever I'm going to create a container, this command is going to be run. Okay, let me come outside of this. Let me save this Docker file, and let me quickly create a image from this container. Again, the command it would be same, the docker build -f, my docker file name, then the name of my container and dot folder to show where my docker file is present. I've created this one. The next command which I'm going to run is to create a container from this image. It has been created, and I will run hostname and see. If you see here what we have our hello. Hello is coming from my entry point, and the hostname we have mentioned while creation. If I'm going to create one more container name called as entry point C3 and remove the hostname one, let me press enter and see what we have. We have hello and world. Hello is coming from my entry point, and the world is coming from my CMD. But here what I have mentioned, I have passed one argument, so my CMD was override with this value. Okay, so we have a very detailed discussion. If you're going to pass anything in CMD, it can be overridden at the creation time of my container, while in the case of entry point, if you have mentioned anything, it is going to be run while creation of my container, it cannot be overwritten. Okay, so the next thing which we are going to discuss is copy and add. Let me quickly create a file name called as copy. As you can see here, I mentioned from ubuntu, then I mentioned the label. And if you see this time what I have done, rather than mentioning run two times, I have mentioned the run single time only. So both the command are going to create a single layer inside my Docker file. Okay, and this run is basically responsible to start my service. But if you have noticed what I have mentioned here, copy. What is the purpose of copy? The purpose of copy is to copy files or directories from the host machine to the image being built. In my host machine, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a file name called as index.html, and this index.html, it is going to be copied inside this path. Okay, so this is the purpose of copy. So from my host machine, if this is my host machine, if I've created any file which I want to copy it to inside the image, what I have to mention inside my Docker file, I have to mention copy, my file name, and the destination, source, and the destination. And for the source, we have to mention our file name. Let me come outside of this Docker file. So before creating an image, what I'm going to do, I'll create a file name called as vi index.html, and I will mention here this is a copy demo. Okay, as I have mentioned, the copy command is basically responsible to copy the files or directories from the source path to a destination path. The source path is the place from where we are running our container. Destination, I would say, inside our image. Let me quickly create an image from it. Docker build -f. The name of my Docker file is copy, and -t, the image name, and doc. Okay, so my image has been created. The next thing what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a container from it. My container has been created. Let me log in inside this container. There's one typo. Let me set it. I'll mention here copy demo -c1, enter. Right now I'm inside my container. Let me cat on this path and see this is a copy demo. So we are able to see this file inside my container. So what is the purpose of copy? To copy the files or directory from the host machine to the image being built. So the same purpose of the add also, it is going to copy the files or directory, plus we are good to download the things from the URL. That is the difference between the copy and add. Add, I would say, is equal to the features which we have from copy, plus we are good to download the URL also. Okay, in secure environment we generally use copy instead of using add, because add is going to fetch the information from the internet.